So I turned to a UU minister who I find so compelling and honest in order to frame my thoughts for this morning. I tuned into a 2016 service at our annual General Assembly for a sermon titled, "All Thy Getting, Get Understanding." There's actually like a wealth of recordings of old things on the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly page. You can tune into things from the past and some incredible music as well. This sermon was by Nancy McDonald Ladd. She brings to light the hope and the heartbreak and the yearning of others in community, and how deep connections and encounters across differences are the places where the real stories and the real struggles arise, where that intersection is where learning happens. Prior to Nancy's sermon at this service, a young man from Unity Church Unitarian read a poem called "The Place Where We Are Right." It's a poem by Yehuda Amishai. Amishai was an Israeli poet who was born in Germany, who immigrated with his family to Palestine in 1936. He fought in the Israeli War of Independence as a young man, but later he became an advocate of peace and reconciliation in the region, and he worked with Palestinian writers. His being was one that learned how to be in intersections and grow and change. So here is his poem. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard. But doubts and love dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. Nancy is a fabulous storyteller, and she opens her sermon with the story of being the very first female altar server at St. Matthew's Catholic Church in a small town in Posey County, Indiana. An altar service might have been an altar boy. Altar server would have been an altar boy in the past. She said she was just all into the smells and the bells and the glory and the rituals of Sunday morning. The altar servers were set up on a Sunday rotation, and she had been assigned one Sunday each month. Unfortunately, she said, her Sunday had what was called the B team, meaning the new kid, the girl with the pink sparkly glasses and a home perm, as she describes herself, and a priest who was not the regular priest, who was a pretty hip guy, but instead the second string priest, who was sort of an old, stodgy, boring priest who served on her Sundays. She told us with great detail about her first Sunday morning in the pivotal moment after communion, where the ritual was where the priest cleaned the chalice and the paten, which is that plate is with the chalice that they used for Eucharist. He cleaned it free from the last holy drops and the crumbs of that sacrament. Well, Nancy was well trained in her job, and she was ready to go. Her role was to pour a little bit of water from a tiny cut glass pitcher into the chalice, whereupon the priest would swish it around a little bit and drink the water and wipe the whole thing clean with this little embroidered cloth, which the altar server would handily provide, kind of like a waiter at a fancy restaurant, Nancy describes. She talks about being so ready that first morning on the chancel, her hands feeling sanctified by the seriousness of the moment ahead. She remembers walking up to the priest, so ready to pour the water and to begin that sacred ritual. And as her hand rose up to meet him, instead of holding his cup for her to fill it, he raised his hand too, still holding the chalice and looking her right in the eye. He raised his hand high above her head. So she, a stubborn and confident little girl, not really understanding what was going on, raised her hand higher than the jug of water, and then he reached higher with the cup until he finally lifted that cup so high that the only way she could have done her job was to go back to the sacristy, get a trampoline, and slam dunk that holy water, as she says. From her little girl perspective, she thought that she surely was doing it wrong. That's the total sum of her memory that day. She doesn't even really remember how it was resolved. She says her mother watched the drama from a different perspective, however, an adult perspective, and her mom had heard the congregation gasp as one collective breath because the congregation knew what she did not as a little girl. They knew he did that because she was a girl and he didn't think she belonged in the chancel. So he made a point. And the next time her Sunday rolled around again, guess where they all were? Sunday after Sunday, she held out her hand and he held out the cup. She says, we were right there and we stayed there on every third Sunday. From then on, she held out the water and he held up the cup and their hands met. And the liturgy happened Sunday after Sunday, month after month, and in and out of the years. She says we were stuck with each other, showing up for the magic long enough that the magic actually happened. One Sunday, she says she showed up and she was in the sacristy, which is that little room where all the liturgical items are stored. And she grabbed her alb, which is the robe that she wore during the service, out of the closet. And when she opened the little door, she noticed a newspaper clipping taped to the door. And it was a piece from the local hometown paper. It's a little town. So she said it wasn't hard to get into the hometown paper. And it was a picture of her from a swim meet. And that old priest had clipped it and he had taped it there. And with his little handwriting that she said is marked up everything around that area with the sacred water and everything, had his little handwriting on, he had written 2 words, R. Nancy. She said he had even underlined the R part. After that, he posted every notice of Nancy in that small hometown paper because by then she belonged not only in the chancel, but in the church. Today, she declared boldly from that large GA stage, I am a preacher woman in part because of the sense of being known and claimed and even understood by that cranky old man. And today that priest not only serves among a whole slew of female altar servers, but he's even gone so far as to speak favorably about the ordination of women in the Catholic Church. She describes that old man as having a new heart, a heart formed by love and relationship with a small and determined girl. Nancy is very clear that the meeting of hands and the sea change of possibility were realized not because they were heroes of their own story, nor because they earned the grace of their encounter, but because they were stuck with each other. She wasn't what the priest was looking for, and he sure wasn't what she was looking for in a priest. Neither of them particularly got what they wanted. And as it turned out, she said, not getting what we wanted, being stuck with one another, that understanding might arise in the very friction of our difference. Not getting what we wanted was the only thing that made change possible for any of us. If you'd like to hear Nancy's full sermon, I will make sure the link goes out with the recording of my sermon today. She's got this charming Southern accent, and it's just great to hear her actually talk about her own childhood. And then also on that same YouTube, you will hear Dr. Glenn Thomas Rideout, who is an amazing musician, and he has the GA choir singing beautifully. It's really quite a striking service. I tell you this story this morning because we're reflecting on what it means to be a community of faith, because I tell you the story because it resonates so strongly with me. It's not the part about being an altar server or the part about Nancy's earnest sense of the holy and her part of it as being a young child. I think it's really the part of the story that demonstrates what happens over time when we choose to stay. When we decide to let relationships in the church change us and change each other. You've heard me say that one of the most unique things I find about being part of a church community is that it's a community that can literally last a lifetime. Unlike schools or teams or jobs or other parts of our lives that have a seasonal quality, if we choose to stay, this community of faith can accompany us through multiple stages in our life. There are people here who have raised their children here, who have memorialized their beloveds when they died. There's people who risked doing something new here, who dove into anti-racism or service in a way that they never imagined. Churches, if we choose to stay and actively engaged, are a learning ground for being human. Actually, for being the humans we hope to be, our best selves, who have enough courage and grace and forgiveness and understand that this experience of being human, it's sloppy and it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it's really tedious and it's humbling, especially when we choose to show up authentically and with the vulnerability in the presence of others who are being human and are in part of this meaning-making business and take it seriously. I think what gets in the way, at least for me, of a noble pursuit of living by my highest values and in the way of what creates good in the world, what holds us back sometimes from waking up every morning and feeling grateful for our lives and recognizing the inherent worth and dignity of all who cross our paths. What holds us back from paying attention to the care of the independent web of life and not remaining idly to the side of the struggles for justice on our behalf of our planet and each other. I think that maybe one big part of it is our egos, that comfort of believing we are right, as described in that poem, and that implicit in us being right means others are wrong. The smugness that comes from a lack of generosity or curiosity or grace or compassion towards one another, well-developed walls that seem to have been created in many of us of self-righteousness that separates us. With such a stance, it's hard, we harden ourselves and we leave no room for growth. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right, it's hard and it's trampled like a yard at this period of time before you water it. It is hard and trampled, but doubts and loves dig up the world like a mow, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. I do believe we need to leave room for the doubts and the loves that dig up the world like a mole or a plow, for that whisper that reminds us that when we commit to community, when we show up with an open and loving heart, there is so much to be learned and gained as students of where and how love is calling us to be. Nancy brings up another image, which I love. It's from Mickey Scott Bay Jones, who is a interfaith leader and activist. Mickey says, relationship is the sandpaper that wears away our resistance to change. Relationship is the abrasion that agitates enough to make a way forward. It smooths the way for the sacred, even as it rubs us raw. Relationship is the sandpaper of life. I'm going to repeat that a little faster because I think it deserves it. Relationship is the sandpaper that wears away our resistance to change. Relationship is the abrasion that agitates enough to make a way forward. It smooths the way for the sacred, even as it rubs us raw. Relationship is the sandpaper of life. So here's the truth. Any of us can go off on our own path of ethical living and spiritual growth. There is enough in the world right now that is accessible or online or in a drop-in basis. We are living in a remarkable time and place where there are deep thinkers in yoga and meditation and natural beauty and spiritual centers holding classes that are readily available. But here's the difference when you stay somewhere with people over time. As a community of faith, we hold one another in relationship. We break open assumptions. We push each other outside of our comfort zones. We stumble, we fall, We practice being in relationship over time, coming forward to serve and feeling times of community care, times that we can provide leadership. We come here broken, and over time we are given the opportunity to see ourselves and see our own rightness in that place that can sometimes leave the ground way too hard and way too dry, with no place for growth or new life. So our mission here is to celebrate and actively examine faith. We challenge one another with loving kindness to be our best selves and work for a flourishing world. My goodness, we are imperfect, thank God. We so often fall short of what we espouse as our mission and our visions, but we take seriously and we find joy and what it means to create and be a part of a community that matters to one another and that matters beyond our walls. And if we get out of our own way, if we let go of being right and instead examine the times when the abrasion of sandpaper people or situations make us uncomfortable or want to retreat, we may just come to a new understanding of ourselves and others. We may just become the people and the community that lives into the beauty and love inherent in our UU principles and the vision of this beloved community. May it be so, and amen.